The risk for type 2 diabetes is quite high. 1 in 3 Canadians are at risk for type 2 diabetes, which is kind of nuts if you think about it. Adult Canadians, like you have like a third chance of developing it in adulthood.
So when we did our podcast, Embrace You First, we talked about diabetes, but we need to talk about it again just because it is so prevalent. And this is November. It is Diabetes Awareness Month. And we're going to talk beyond diabetes because really we're all at risk. Do you want to address that, Dr. Tanya Wild?
Yes. And stay to the end because we have a challenge for you, a fun challenge that's 2 weeks long. The risk for type 2 diabetes is quite high. 1 in 3 Canadians are at risk for type 2 diabetes, which is kind of nuts if you think about it. Adult Canadians, like you have like a third chance of developing it in adulthood. And what is type 2 diabetes? Essentially, it's like excess sugar levels that our body can't handle, our insulin can't handle. And so then our insulin often goes up first to deal with it. And we have excess sugar and goes into our fat stores around our belly. So if you start to notice excess weight around the belly, and then perhaps your doctor is saying to you that you have a fatty liver, and you're like, what's a fatty liver? That sounds scary. It's usually one of the first signs of being insulin resistant, which is the precursor, the thing that happens before getting type 2 diabetes. And why are we all getting this? What's going on?
Well, yeah. I love that you say this because there are people that are definitely more susceptible, like maybe a genetic disposition, or if you have polycystic ovaries. But that said, it goes way beyond that because unfortunately, if you haven't noticed already at the grocery store, everything's packaged. Like it's hard to find anything in its pure form these days.
Right.
Right.
So not only are we not physically hunting animals, or maybe there are hunters listening, but, so we're not doing the physical work to get our food, to farm our food. We're going to a grocery store and then there's sugar abundant, like abundance. Like it's really hard almost to find something that doesn't have sugar in it. Mm-hmm. And they recommend that for children, the total amount of sugar intake be no more than 15 grams of sugar a day, which is like 3 teaspoons or a tablespoon equivalent. And for adults, 25 grams, which is 5 teaspoons of sugar a day. And that doesn't include fruit, but everything beyond that, anything packaged. And if you think about it, you pick up, a drink at Starbucks, you're getting like, in some cases, 40 to 60 grams of sugar right there in one drink.
Yes. And you would never know it. And it looks harmless because it's a drink and it goes down so well. And then how about juices and juice boxes?
Yeah, I mean, right there, you're done for
grams. Yeah, absolutely.
So the funniest thing is that juice boxes, or juice, used to be on the Canadian Food Guide as acceptable as a fruit option, as a fruit and vegetable option. And it was only in the last few years that they changed it to not include juices.
So, I did not know they changed it. That's amazing.
Yeah. There's much healthier food guide now, recommendations. It's more balanced plates, and they took off juices as a fruit and vegetable option, which is quite outstanding because if you drink a little juice box, that alone is like 15 grams of sugar right there.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's so tough because, you're thinking, oh gosh, I cut out the soda pop, so I'm good. I'm going to be healthier. I'm going to have juice. And little do they know, unless you actually read the packaging with the ingredients, which Dr. Tanya and I both really recommend that you do look at the packaging and the ingredients list, because it's like, you just have no clue. You're thinking they're being super healthy and it's like, oh crap.
Right. So it's sometimes information overload too, right? You look at a package and you're trying to interpret it. If you're not in our industry and very aware of this stuff, you're looking and you're like, okay, protein, carbohydrates, sugars, fiber, net carbohydrates. Like there's just so many elements to a package. What you're looking at is literally how many grams of sugar under the carbohydrates. And then you're also looking at the ingredient list. So you're trying to buy foods that have the least number of ingredients. That's helpful because it means, less preservatives and more healthy. But then also see if sugar is in the top 3. If sugar's in the top 3 ingredients, it's probably not a healthy product. Mm-hmm. So that's a helpful little tip. Try to, limit how much sugar is in it. But then let's say it is natural sugars and it's lower down. Maybe it is a little bit higher. It's going to be a little bit better. like higher in the list, higher in total sugars, but in the list of ingredients, it's lower, and perhaps it's from fruit sugars. That would be a better option. But the best is eat fruit, avoid juice, and then stick to the outside aisles. And, instead of the boxed, packaged foods that are in the inner aisles of a grocery store, try to walk the outside and pick as long as you're not dairy free or dairy intolerant, you're going for the cheeses and the yogurts. Milk has a lot of sugar, so I'd try to limit that. If you're going to have dairy, go with the cheese and yogurt instead. And, if you look at a cup of milk, I think it's at least 12 grams or something of sugar. So people don't count that, but that would be counted in the total. And then you're going for your fruits and your vegetables and your nuts and seeds. And, if you're sticking to the inside aisles, you're not just looking, for example, if you buy bread, people think, oh, it's got no sugar added or less sugar added. Well, bread would be considered a hidden type of sugar because in our body, how it breaks down also matters. That's a big concept that people have a harder time understanding because they think, oh, well, I don't eat bread. I eat, gluten-free bread. Like I don't eat regular bread. I eat gluten-free bread. So that's okay. Now, is that okay, Mary?
Well, unfortunately, I find that, the gluten-free breads that it doesn't taste like a hockey puck, they're going to actually have a ton of sugar because what are the substitutes? It's completely quick sugars. So, what I see on the ingredients list is typically potato starch, cornstarch, tapioca powder, all those kinds of things, or white rice powders, and it'll help it to taste better. But unfortunately, it is pure sugar. So as soon as it hits your tummy, like if I eat that stuff, I'll want to nap immediately.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that rice actually has lower protein than a wheat protein. So if you're not gluten intolerant or recommended by your doctor to avoid gluten and you are still eating bread as an option in your diet, if you were to compare, gluten containing bread versus gluten-free bread, the glycemic index and how rapidly that bread breaks down in your body, which then just means like your sugar would go high. It's a lot higher glycemic index for the gluten-free stuff. So people think they're doing a healthier thing by going gluten-free. But it's actually, you just have to be very cautious. You'd want to eat foods in their whole form. So instead of going out for, looking for quinoa bread or, rice bread, eat the grain itself. Eat whole grain quinoa, not turned into pasta and milled. Sure, it tastes nice because it's, broken down, and anything that's broken down and milled tastes better. But it also means that the complex carbohydrate chain, which then breaks down to sugar in our body, it's a fast breakdown if it's refined and milled because it's already broken down. Yeah. So our body doesn't have to do as much work. We want our body to do work. And we also want more fiber to help slow it down and more protein. So fiber and protein are helpful.
Well, and let's just bring it into this practical space because you can be hearing this or seeing this episode and going, oh my gosh, I'm left with nothing. I might as well just have a plate of ice. But wait a minute, in Chinese medicine, ice is not good.
Or throw in the towel and go out and get a sugar ridden latte and have your slice of bread with butter and just say, forget it. It's too confusing, right? Yes. So I think it's really helpful to, like you're saying, break it down and say, okay, well, what can I have that's, if let's say you are gluten sensitive, what can I have that's gluten-free that is not a bread or a pasta that's broken down and milled? Could you have oats, for example, for breakfast? Or perhaps you're having, a quinoa pilaf, or you're having like brown rice with salmon, or brown rice and beans with salmon with a bunch of vegetables like bok choy or rapini on the side. So it helps to break down. What I've been doing with my patients is breaking it down by the week, because sometimes they look at me like with a deer in head, like they're like, take out pasta and bread from my diet. Are you nuts?
Yeah, I eat it every day. This is in my ancestry. I'm Italian, right?
Yes, for sure. And so, it's not a matter of taking it out completely, but it's also recognizing portion sizes. So we'll come back to different grain options and how to make it easier to kind of bring these alternatives into your diet. But what would be a healthy portion size, do you think, Mary, for pasta in cups or cup measurement in a plate? Like how much pasta would be a reasonable amount on a plate with a meal balanced with vegetables and
got it.
chicken,
okay. So
fish?
Of course, ideally none, but if you have it, then maybe like a quarter.
Yeah. So a quarter plate?
Of the
or
plate.
Quarter? Yeah. So a quarter of the plate, or like fasting is half a cup. Half a cup is what they recommend. How many people do you know when they're having a plate of pasta? No,
Never.
Right? You know what the question I was going to ask, right? Yeah. It's very infrequent. So if you're going to have pasta in your diet, it's portion sizing or portion controlling that so that your body doesn't get overwhelmed and then insulin pumps out and sugar goes high. So you can still have it, but have less and try to make sure that it has fiber in it and it's a whole grain form. That's really important.
My little trick, if you guys want to hang on to that, I'll spiralize zucchini. And here's the thing, I can only control my husband and my kids so much. So they may be having the regular pasta. Yeah. And so, and the truth and the reality is like, you need a lot of this zucchini pasta before you get full. So what I'll do is like, I'll have this giant plate and I'm still like, I could eat a lot more because it's like a cow. Imagine like cow graze like all day long. Well, I'm not going to sit and eat all day long. So I actually can add, I hardly eat pasta to begin with, but if they're having pasta and I have it with them, I'll have my spiralized zucchini and then I add in a little bit of their pasta. So nice. I don't feel guilty. And it's like, it's not necessarily by doing things perfect. It's like, how can we decrease it? And you still have joy and you still share in the meal because I am, and I grew up as a foodie. Yes. So it's like, I don't want to feel deprived and I still want to have joy as I eat. Right. Yes. So it's not complete deprivation and still have joy.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. So if you were doing a spinach, chicken, pasta dish, you could cook the chicken and the spinach first. And then for your portion, have half a cup, mix it into the pan fry, mix it and then throw it into your plate. And rather than the whole meal being made together. And then for your husband and daughter, you could do the rest as the recipe would call for example. Is that what you mean? Like you make your pasta and throw it into the entire recipe. But for you would kind of take out a healthy portion of spinach and chicken, put it into your bowl, put in half a cup of pasta, then throw it back into the pan, the pan. And is that what you mean?
No, that is a great option. But I'm talking about, I don't even have the pasta. We make a separate pasta. Yeah. And they'll have their portion and I actually eat with them the spiralized zucchini. Spiralized zucchini, which becomes like pasta strings.
Yes. Right? Will you have any of the pasta in there though? So
what I'll do is I'll finish my pasta, my so-called zucchini. Pasta, which is actually zucchini. And then I'm like, I'm totally not full at all. So then I'll add in a little bit of extra pasta and then I'll still feel good about it, right?
Like the actual pasta.
The actual physical pasta. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't mix my pasta with the meal itself. But you also hit another point that I think is very relevant, and being Asian and where we are more, for example, white rice heavy, where we know, and we didn't address this yet, but white rice, actually you kind of did, but white rice itself is literally like eating sugar. Yeah. Right.
So that again, if you're really kind of wanting to stick with white rice, then portion sizing half a cup as a portion. Or if you want to get even better, because maybe you do have creeping sugars and you're pre-diabetic and you're afraid of developing type 2 diabetes, you can switch it to brown rice, which still has a high glycemic index, but it's lower than white rice. And apparently refrigerating white rice lowers the glycemic index before you eat it. Like if you refrigerate it and then you heat it. Yeah.
Okay. That's a real thing. That. Really? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. That is an awesome tip, guys, for all you rice lovers out there. And, 1.4 billion Chinese people are on this earth eating rice. So that was a great tip. And my other tip is when we wash the rice, we wash it like a gazillion times. I've even, I think the Middle East, they do this where they take the white rice and they'll have it boiled and then they strain it and then they do it again. And the reason being is that you're taking a lot of the starch out of it. of the
Okay.
rice, right?
The other thing is mixing half a half. I've been to sushi restaurants. Well, they'll do half brown rice and half white rice in the sushi rolls, or if in a bento box, which I like that as well.
Oh,
So it's like half or brown rice. You
which
order
is
ahead.
brown rice. Yeah.
Yeah, you order ahead, and they have a pot going of the brown rice.
Speaking of which, I think that, let's be real here. We're all so busy and we don't necessarily have the time to cook every single day. And what are we going to do? We're going to get takeout. And I tell you, I do it all the time. And we may feel like, oh, we're being inconvenient asking for special things, but they don't care. It's like, so they scoop less. So let's say I'm actually getting a Buddha bowl and there's a base of rice. So I'll say, hey, can you add more veggies and just like a little bit of rice? And all the time they're like, yes. Sometimes they'll say, oh, I might need to charge you extra. I'm like, go for it. That's great. To get what you want versus just then feeling guilty and bad that you're eating something that you're not supposed to eating. Like there's no point in that.
50 cents extra for vegetables that, allow you to keep your sugars low and feel better. It's like, it's a good energy output, right? Like you end up feeling less like a hit, like you said earlier, like if you eat, a bowl of pasta, then was it bowl of pasta? Then you're ready to sleep. Or no, is the gluten free?
Any kind of like pasta or bread or white rice, like literally within an hour, I'm going to want a nap. And I'm telling you all this because both my parents have type 2 diabetes, which is completely all about their diet and lack of exercise. Now that my father's gone to Hong Kong, my mother tells me her diabetes is so much better because he has less self-restraint and she has to help cook. So now she's eating way better and her blood sugars are better and she's walking twice a day. So like, how you eat and how you move makes a giant impact. And we haven't talked and discussed about the movement piece, which is also super, super critical. And so like simple things like, so literally what she'll do is she'll have a meal and then she goes for her walk right after, which is way better than eating and then having a nap right after.
Yes, yes. Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. So what happens when you eat a carb-rich meal that perhaps is very refined and milled and it breaks down really fast is that your insulin from your pancreas, it's saying, okay, I'm going to pump out and I'm going to help your body deal with that sugar. But if you have a little bit of resistance because you have the genes, the genetics, or it's just such a big load of sugar for your body, the insulin will go really high and then you'll get a sugar low. And that's that feeling that you have when you want to take a nap. So it's like a wrap it in, wrap it out. And then you're like, oh, I'm tired. And then you want to eat something more sugary. Like so when you go to a restaurant, like they'll say, would you like bread? And you say, yes. And then you're more likely, apparently, to then buy dessert, which makes sense. And then they're selling more. So they bring the bread. And so I say, no, thank you. So that I don't then crave the dessert. And then I have much higher energy. So people always want, like they'll pay anything to get more energy. Well, having less flour products and less sugar will really drive up your energy. It's amazing. So it takes a lot of willpower, though, to say no to that delicious white bread with the olive oil and vinegar if you're at a restaurant. But if I don't get it, I'm less likely to order the dessert. So that they say that's a real thing. And I didn't realize.
Wow. Okay. So I love these two tips. So, number one, avoiding the bread, but again, we're not pure. We're not perfect. So no, if you, and listen, I do know lots of people that come in as patients. They'll tell me that, they go out once a week or to get takeout or actually dine in. So if you can avoid that, but again, maybe have some room. All right, fine. Today I'm going to do this. And then, can you control yourself instead of having like, a whole basket of bread? Can you have like a half a piece of bread? Is that possible? And if not, will you surrender? And if you surrender, can you go for that walk immediately after? Right? It's just all how you manage it to keep yourself healthy and strong and not being perfect.
No, going for the walk helps your body use those sugars because now your muscles are using the sugar. And it also helps to make the receptors communicate better with the insulin so the sugar gets used properly. Because if you have insulin resistance from years of high pumping insulin, eventually they stop communicating the insulin hormone and the receptors. And so then they yell like, hey, work. And then it's not working. The numbers of insulin goes higher, and then the receptors get more damage, and then they just don't communicate. And that's when you get diabetes. And a lot of people say, oh no, my doctor told me that I don't have any risk. My blood sugars are good. And there's this lovely test called the glycated hemoglobin. It looks like HbA1c. And if that number is healthy, you would assume you don't have any risk. But it's interesting because if you actually do a glucose challenge and check your fasting insulin and then your half an hour insulin, 1 hour, 2 hour, if the levels spike really high above 500 and sugars start to climb after the half hour, 1 hour mark, you're not going to see that information just by doing the 3-month sugar average. You have to do a challenge to really see if you have that risk. If you're really wanting to uncover why you have that post-food fatigue and are wondering why you're tired all the time, if perhaps both parents have diabetes. I've seen it so many times. And then when you have that information, doing this like a fasting glucose insulin challenge, it's like a 2-hour one, you now are equipped with the knowledge, oh, like my body's not responding well to sugar. And now I really need to clamp down and make some changes. So it's motivating to have that information. Have you ever heard of a fasting insulin glucose challenge?
Yeah. Well, and they do glucose challenges. Well, like even for pregnant women, right?
But they don't do the insulin, they'll do the glucose.
Right.
And so this test, they look at insulin and glucose. So it's fascinating because your glucose levels might be controlled and well, keeping under, the 6 or 7 at each mark, but your insulin might be overreacting to do that, which is then you might see a sugar low at the end. And that's why you're like, oh, I'm so tired. And you just don't see the information without the insulin. So it's helpful to do both. If you're really kind of trying to uncover, like, why are you always so tired after eating? Could be food sensitivities, but often it's the type of carbohydrate a patient is eating.
Sorry, because it's in my head and I have to get it out. So do people just request through their physician, or do they just not normally do this?
So they don't normally do it.
Exactly.
It would be something that usually family doctors are dealing with acute medicine more often. They're doing clinical screenings, which are very important. One of the best things you can do for yourself is screen, right? Do your pap exams and check for lipids and all that and understand where you sit. Colonoscopies, breast exams, the works, right? So that's really important. And then they're dealing with acute infections, injuries, and either they're prescribing antibiotics or steroids for, bigger things. In terms of trying to catch type 2 diabetes early, it's that quick glycated hemoglobin screen or just the fasting glucose. They might not even do that A1C glycated hemoglobin. So to do a fasting insulin glucose challenge, that's something MedCan might do, like one of those corporate wellness kind of screening clinics or a naturopathic doctor.
Right. So a lot of people can't afford the MedCan. So I think the naturopathic doctor route is a very good route because a lot of people have their work cover it through their insurance plan. So, DM Dr. Tanya, go to Alive Holistic Health and just ask for it, right? And you can guide them through this.
It's under $50 to do it. It's quite fascinating. And especially patients, because we see a lot of women getting pregnant or we're supporting them to get pregnant. And then once they're pregnant, they might be patients perhaps with polycystic ovary syndrome, and then they're at risk for gestational diabetes. So they're doing the fasting glucose challenge. So they're familiar with that, called drinking the sugary drink to see what their body's doing in response to that. But a lot of people haven't heard of the fasting insulin glucose challenge. And if you develop gestational diabetes, which is diabetes in pregnancy, then postpartum, you're at higher risk for the prediabetes. So to see how you're doing perhaps a year postpartum is helpful if you had gestational and you are managing it while pregnant, gestational diabetes. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. I just hope that you guys aren't overwhelmed by all that we're saying. But at the end of the day, you can rewatch this or re-listen. And we have other podcasts that you can go towards that we will put in our show notes, which includes the ones we did before My Fertility, which is Embrace You First. So go ahead, check that out. And we're going to talk more. And Tanya, do you have anything else, insights to share before we drop off?
Yeah, I wanted to review and give patients options. So what are people options in terms of alternatives? So, and maybe you can help me with this, but I love to recommend breaking it down by the week. So in a month, there are generally 4 weeks, except November is 5. So each week, change your healthy carbohydrate that's not a flour, so flour-free carbohydrate, change it by the week so you're prepared. Let's say week 1 is all about bean recipes. So are there any bean recipes that you like to make that then you would portion size that legume recipe as part of your plate? For example, a white kidney bean salad, or there's dal, or there's kidney beans added to chili. Those are some examples that people don't think about beans as a carbohydrate, but that would be a healthy alternative. And then week 2, you can just throw in some ideas if you have any, just interrupt me. Week 2 might be like brown rice recipes. So it's all about alternative, again, flour-free options. So
well, no, my only comment is to that. It's brilliant because, especially if people are like buying a canned bean or something, it's like, oh my gosh, I have all these beans. I'm not going to stick it all in one recipe. So it's also a practicality, and financially, it's a better option too, because if you're looking at different recipes for that, giant can of beans, then you don't waste it where it gets moldy in the fridge. So that's brilliant. And then the other piece is that it makes it more convenient. So let's say it's your brown rice week. So you just make a whole whack of it at the beginning of the week. So then you don't have to cook it every single day. It's brilliant.
And then you can freeze some. And so, for example, this week I had made salmon for the kids, and then I cut the outside. And with that salmon went sweet potatoes and the greens that they didn't eat because they're kids. But there was cucumbers on the plate and spinach and whatever. They picked at it. You know how it is. And then I'm just being honest because I do my best. Of course. But I recognize that this is, like I don't, like people think, oh, how do you get your kids to eat vegetables? Well, they'll eat soups and stews, and I do my best, and we're all in this together. Anyway, and then with that salmon, I took out the outside and I put it into a seafood chowder with shrimp. And then my carbohydrate was sweet potato with the first dish, but then it's potato in this seafood chowder. So I'm using the leftovers of the salmon. So this is my root vegetable week. And then I had a beet salad. So when I go shopping, I base my recipes around my healthy carbohydrates. And then I try and prep my protein so that it's just fast. Like I just don't have time. It's like, okay, what protein is it? And I'll cook up a pot of brown rice one week, a pot of quinoa one week. My kids don't like quinoa. So the quinoa is for me. And you were saying quinoa for you, when we were just talking off screen, it's uncomfortable, right? Like when you eat quinoa.
Yeah. I mean, I like the taste. I like the graininess, and I like how it can fill my tummy. But at the end of the day, after a couple of hours, I can get a little, it's hard to digest in my body. And I recognize that it happens for other people. And so I guess one of the caveats is that some of these things that you try may not be something that you have been used to growing up. So you try it as a healthy option. And maybe that's when you want to limit it to a certain amount so that your body is not going to completely reject it. Yeah. And I think the other piece that is so relevant and important in all of this is that it does require planning. So you can't just go off the cuff and say, okay, this week I'm going to do this. It's like might want to sit down one Sunday and just actually figure it out for the month. What grain is it going to be this grain of the week?
What healthy, what grain, what root vegetables are you going to buy? Then the next week, legumes, and rotate through those various legumes. And maybe you'll have the same one for 3 days. And make sure you don't over portion size beans either, because you'll get a lot of gas and cramping. Yes. There's a high need of enzymes in your body to break down legumes. And some people have, which we'll talk talk in another episode, irritable bowel, and they lack those enzymes. And so they can't have high FODMAP, carbohydrates. So it's figuring that out as you go. So maybe you might not have a bean week, but so quinoa week, a brown rice week, or it could be a multi-grain week, and you're doing some oats and millet and buckwheat. And then you have grain-free weeks where you're doing only root vegetables that week, and then your beans. And maybe it's like a nut and seed week the next week. People think of nuts and seeds as fats, but they're high in carbs too. So there's
I love this. And as you say this, I'm like, we should call this the anti-keto healthy diet. as a podcast, because it's like everybody's so into this keto thing, and yet they're not necessarily healthy because it works.
Yeah. You know what happens? I find that keto works very well if you're trying to lose a large amount of weight, but it's not sustainable. And you end up going so low in carbs that you then, binge on something unhealthy like chips. It's really hard to sustain. And people know that that's healthier to eat less carb, but they don't realize it's not no carb we want. We just want healthier carbs.
Yes.
Right. So the balance.
Yes. So let's drop this off, because we can just go on at it for days. So We're good at it.
So hopefully those ideas help, because we want to challenge you to have less sugar, not just in sugar in packaged foods, but flour and avoiding flour, limiting flour and portion sizing. And we challenge you to 2 weeks for this month, Diabetes Awareness Month, to just push yourself, outside of your box, to avoid sugar and avoid flour for 2 weeks. I challenge you. We challenge you. Mary, do you agree? We're challenging, and I challenge you, Mary. Could you do it?
So then that means
flour-free, sugar-free.
Oh my gosh.
Weeks.
Okay, so then we're gonna both go on social media and actually, be accountable. I'll have to say, okay, guys, day 1.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
Should we do that? Okay, let's do that.
100%.
Okay, cool. All right.
Awesome.
So that's what we're going to commit to. So, and so hopefully that you'll join and contact us and let us know that you're doing it with us. That'll be awesome, because we need motivation too. At least I do.
Totally.
You're
for sure.
Perfect, Tanya.
No, I'm not. My patients motivate me. I'm like, wow, if they can do it, I can do it.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Awesome. So if you're listening to this podcast, and if you like what you hear and you've learned, please go ahead and subscribe, and then make comments and review and rate us, because this will help other people hear our podcast, because that's why we're doing this, to be able to spread the world of health, and because that's what it's all about, isn't it? Thanks, guys, for watching and listening.